Hey you, I'm Ali Amo, and this is the A Lease on Life podcast. We're now officially back into the swing of things in 2025. There was quite a lot of interest in our last episode, which was the yin and yang relationship between ego and self. I think it's an important conversation to have had, not just for me, but also to be exposed to different ideas and perspectives on ego, because when it comes to the beliefs that we hold, which is one of the fundamental elements in the web of life, it's not very often that you deeply reflect or introspect on what you think of certain concepts or terms. So perhaps you aligned with a lot of things that were said, either from perspective or from mine, but I certainly had my beliefs challenged, recognized quite a few of them as well, and started to evolve my understanding so that I could change my beliefs. And it got me thinking and reflecting on some of the cycles that I know are prevalent in society as a result of the ego-driven world that we live in. The one cycle that I thought would be easiest to introduce, because it's something so relatable, you may not have necessarily seen it that way, but with social media and influencers and the way the digital you is projected, it's a good way to see how you have those two sides. You have the truth, and then you have what's reflected or projected outside. So I'd like to introduce you to the cycle of appearances. I'm reading directly from my book. This is a subsection. This particular cycle is based on the idea that nothing is good enough, and it starts being inflicted on us by our family. As children, many of us learnt that our parents cared more about how everything appeared to others than anything else, including how we felt. I'm going to stop and ask you, did you experience in your childhood where your behavior or your emotions or your thought expression, what you're saying, what you think, or just being yourself in a public environment, whether that be with other members of family, with friends of your family, shopping centers, movies, whatever, was it more important how you behaved or how you responded emotionally or what you were thinking? Was it more important that the way you were being was more in line with what they wanted, they being your parents, as they were aware of how your actions would make them look, and not having control over you ultimately led them to threaten you or bribe you, threaten you if you weren't to do a certain thing, or you were to do certain things. And also, oh, if you do this, if you don't have a meltdown, you'll get this. That's essentially the cycle of appearances. It matters more how things look than things being real and authentic and how it is. Therefore, you were taught that what other people think is more important than the truth. So the message was clear. How things look on the outside matters the most. This is the most common belief cycle in history, and it's been revolving for generations. You repeat this cycle whenever you are fearful of how something looks, and you do this because deep down you think that you're not good enough. Now, you will have beliefs about how you and your life looks to you, but the cycle becomes physical when you filter what others can see or hear in an effort to influence what they believe. You do this so you can save face when you don't think the truth will make you look good. We all have positivity and negativity in our lives and in ourselves. But both sides are never shown equally. To be raw with others takes courage because being open, honest, and authentic leaves you exposed and vulnerable. You fear people's judgment and negative perceptions, so you won't let them see the truth. Instead, you reflect only what you want them to know and what you think makes you come off best. You usually put on a front to conceal your reality because you don't want to face it. How much do you let people see how it really is? Your house is a mess, but you shove everything in cupboards or under furniture immediately before guests arrive. Your personal life is in pieces, but you act like you got it all figured out. You're drowning in a sea of paperwork, but say you got it under control. Your relationship is falling apart, but you tell everyone it's fine. You also see this cycle functioning in governments, corporations, corporations, and workplaces all over the world. You see it in families, friendships, marriages, and partnerships. We do it to ourselves, and we do it to each other. This cycle operates across all three spheres and exists within everyone's web of life. If you're new to this, new to me, or forgot about the three spheres because it's been a while, on the inside, it's like the egg. You are the yolk, the personal sphere. The egg white, which surrounds the yolk, is the social sphere. And then the shell itself is the world sphere. However, I interchange self with personal, social with societal, and world with global. So on a global level, we don't know the intricate details of the relationships between two countries. We're not privy to those conversations and those exchanges and those deals or those disagreements. What we see on the outside, or what they put on the news, for example, is where they meet for the first time and they're posing for photos, they shake hands. That's the show. That's the appearance. Where deep down, you don't know what's the relationship, what's the nature of it. And you also don't really know what's happened behind closed doors. Also on the global scale, within the governments of the world, there may be people who allude to unrest, for example, or those bitter like squirrels between parties and things. You might have a general gist of what's happening, but you also have people repeating the cycle of appearances in defense of their own party. Then in workplaces in the social sphere, it might be a company that's global and there's different aspects of culture within the workplace. In each place, there's some are toxic, some are not, some are healthy. But have you ever been in a toxic work environment? There's a cycle of appearances in full function and operation because it's not talked about openly, it's not shown openly. Things are done privately and behind closed doors and with small chunks of people. It's not like this shared floor experience. It's not something that's dealt with. You've got the truth, and then you've got the way the workplace is projected, how it's talked about by senior management and things like that. But then you look into, it's also the social sphere or the societal sphere, because your relationship with anyone outside of you that you have a close relationship with is a social sphere relationship. The only relationship that exists in the personal sphere is your relationship with yourself. And don't get me wrong, there is always the cycle of appearances with the self as well, because if that weren't the case, social media and the way people post about their life, they do that for themselves first and foremost. And then it's everybody else secondary. They want to project an image of themselves or a life of themselves that they wish they had. That's why women will filter their bodies. That's what they wish they look like. So, in saying this, I want you to think about how much you let people see how it really is. Breaking this cycle will make you a generational cycle breaker, and you will likely be the first person in your family to even attempt it. But first, you must admit that you are perpetuating this cycle and learn to recognize when you're doing it. Unfortunately, we repeat it so often, it can be hard to recognize this cycle in action. The mental cycle is, I can't tell the truth, I can't show the truth, because the emotional cycle is often feeling shame or embarrassment about it. What goes on inside pushes to be expressed outside. So if it ain't pretty on the inside, then it's going to come out ugly too. The physical cycles used to influence the perception of others vary. So think you've got social media where you're doing it digitally, face to face with somebody. You would be doing it talking face to face, obviously, but then you can evade things with text messages or in phone calls where you're not having to face the person. There's different ways that we repeat this cycle in physical form. But they typically center around verbal expressions. It's like, aside from the photo in the social media post, the written component, the caption, that sort of thing. Some of these are denial, falsehood, fake identity, storytelling, and my personal go-to, deflection. When a conversation is moving towards talking about my life and it isn't positive at the time, I will deflect by asking the person follow-up questions about their situation to get back on the subject of them. I could spend hours catching up with a friend and we leave each other without them really knowing a single thing that's happening in my life. It's a completely different story when things are going great, though. I'm not avoiding discussion about my life so I don't bring the other person down. It's all about self-preservation. It's my ego behind the wheel. How I feel about my reality stops me from sharing any information with others, because if I can't face it alone, I certainly don't want to face it in the presence of another person. If I won't tell it like it is, I won't tell it at all. No matter what cycle is used to avoid being open about how it really is, the fact remains that the truth is being dodged. And it's not just in the company of others. The ego doesn't know how to handle it and doesn't want to. So we tell elaborate stories instead of the truth. We deny existence of the issue at all. We tell the lies that we want to believe. We act like everything's great. There may be a select few people we are honest and raw with in our lives, but for the most part, we keep the real inside and push out the fake. We all repeat this cycle on some level. So when I was going through this cycle in my own life, wow, the emotional components I found can actually vary. So if it starts with a fear, so in an intimate relationship, you're asked a question that you're scared to answer. It could be rooted in insecurity about telling the truth. You feel inferior or inadequate, and that starts the cycle for you. If it's a family member as the example, so think family conversations, you may feel ashamed to tell the truth and feel guilty for doing so, but that's rooted in sadness. If you, like me, found yourself avoidance was the answer at all costs, always avoid talking about it, that hesitation or aversion is actually caused by disgust. That was a hard truth to swallow. Realizing disgust is that core emotion that the others spring from. I was disgusted in my own life, so I was hesitant to share it and avoided even talking about it at the time. But think things like those silly competitions with friends when you talk about when they're having a great life and you're just sitting there like, oh, that's great. Just deep inside, you're like disgusted in yourself. And then you might not share anything like I did, or you might hyper exaggerate some situation, make up a situation, You know what I mean? Tell some story. There's different ways that we approach this cycle, and I'm jumping from the emotional component of the cycle to the physical expression of it, which is right at the end, start and the end. But that middle cycle, that's the part that you really got to crack for yourself in the midst of that cycle repeating. So if you remember the episode where I was talking about the journey of a cycle breaker, this is stopping going around that first roundabout where you're just the active participant. You're just in the moment. You don't realize what you're saying, what you're doing, why, what you're feeling, where it come from. And you're going around that second roundabout and kind of infinity looping. You're trying to passively spectate yourself while you're repeating your cycle. And then you'll flip back to actively participating in it for a sec. And then later you might realize after it's complete, what did I just do? And you can sometimes pull yourself up and reflect. But to catch those thoughts, you might remember how you felt at the time that the cycle was triggered to begin. And you'll likely remember the things you said or the things you did or what you didn't say and didn't do as a result. But to catch the thought train, the mental spiraling or the mental component of the cycle, you need to recognize it once that emotional part kicks in, because your mind will start spiraling and run rings with that emotion and feed it more energy. And then the emotions and the thoughts just keep going until it has to come out of you. But the ones that I found, see, already inside, I'm feeling the shame because this is something that I attributed mostly to parents. The whole, threat if you don't behave or if you do something to embarrass me, say something that embarrasses me, this will happen. I'm a millennial, so I was raised by boomers and that was how it was, but it might have been different for you. Maybe you went the other way and you had parents that would bribe you. If you and your siblings don't fight for this whole thing, then we'll go here after. I'll give you this after. I'll get you this, something like that. But that it starts with insecurity or jealousy. So it might be, say, you're going to a family event or something social with friends of your parents or something, and there's a family group that are very well mannered, very well behaved, very quiet, very shy. So there's not a lot of chaos, we'll just say, but your family's wild and wacky. So, in an effort to maintain control, maintain this composure and this, because they're jealous of how the other family looks, sounds, makes them feel, and it makes them hyper aware of their family. They feel insecure about it because they are judging and they're jealous. Then that makes them feel threatened, and that can result in the anger. So I don't know about you, but I always cop the threats like before. It was always before. It wasn't during. It was always like the pre-warning. And it come with this like hit of anger, because it's a really common thing for parents to feel that idea that your family is a reflection of you. And the reason I feel the shame in bringing this up is because I realized when I was clocking my cycles that I did this as a teacher. This idea that the whole class, how they sat, how they listened, how they communicated, how they played together, everything was a reflection of me. It was the cycle of appearances, because the truth is, behind closed doors, in my classroom, we were wild and wacky. I wanted them to be 100% of themselves, and they saw me. So it was just on the outside that I was teaching them to tame themselves. Don't be your full self in the public sphere. And realizing that, I honestly wasn't like self-hatred. It was just disappointment that I didn't see it until way after the fact. Like, the damage was done. I'm inflicting this cycle on the kids at school that they were likely getting at home, and then on weekends or at sporting events, you have all the activities and whatever. There's the same sort of idea, and you're doing this from childhood. No wonder you have adults that have a completely separate professional person that they are at work compared to the person that they are with their friends, and then a separate person that they show to their family. It's like we wall off aspects of ourselves. The other way, the parent-teacher situation, it could be rooted in embarrassment, and you feel hurt because the belief is that how they feel, how they think, how they act, what they say, what they do, everybody else is a reflection of you. And that makes you feel hurt when they do something that you perceive as wrong, or that you think other people may perceive as wrong. And the response is anger. And that's what you see on the outside. But when you look at that cycle in depth, it's actually hurt, which is caused by the embarrassment. Often we don't even recognize or distinguish between the different emotions that we feel. But I want you to think about your own life. When things aren't going right, or when things are starting to fall apart, do you just avoid seeing your friends or speaking to them, or your family, or you don't want to admit what's happening, you don't want to share what's happening? How do you repeat the cycle of appearances in your own life? It is a cycle that globally is starting to be broken more and more. It does help when celebrities, because of the attention that they get, and then how the content is repeated and shared through other social media outlets and whatnot. But when they come out about the struggle that they had, you had the appearance of them being a certain way, looking a certain way. And when you find out what was behind it, it makes them more human, and it makes you feel we're all human, because we forget that with this projection of perfection. And the cycle of perfectionism is another one, has a lot of ego attached to it, but we'll go into that another day. But I just wanted to start by introducing you to the cycle of appearances. And for the next 2 weeks until our next episode, I want you to reflect and recognize when and how you repeat the cycle of appearances. You may have grown and it used to be different. You used to be a lot more distant and closed off when things aren't great. Or maybe you just weren't sharing a lot when things were great, because your family struggle with certain things, or your friends aren't at the same financial level as you. Maybe you play small to fit in. It could go a few different ways, but I want you to think about how the cycle of appearances is repeated by you. Think about what the root emotions of that would be that start the cycle. And if you can catch yourself inside of it and start passively spectating, what are the thoughts that come up for you? Short and sweet today. Thank you for being here with me for this ep. New ones will come out to you every other Thursday. If you'd like to get a copy of my book, I will link the Amazon purchase in the show notes. You have the ebook and the hard copy, and the audiobook will be coming out soon. So keep an eye out. If you're an audiobook person, I'll do a special sale for my listeners and people on socials. Either way, you take it easy, people. You'll hear from me soon.